Ma'am, I feel I should be honest with you, Harrison Whitmore IV said, his voice dripping with what he probably thought was kindness. Gold doesn't really suit darker skin tones. The gold bracelet slipped from Adaeze Okafor's fingers and hit the glass counter with a sharp crack that echoed through Whitmore and Associates' fine jewelry like a gunshot. She watched it spin, once, twice, before settling on the black velvet display pad, and in that moment of crystalline silence, she felt 50 years of these exact moments collapse into one. The world stopped. Around them, Madison Avenue hummed with its usual morning rhythm. Somewhere, a taxi honked. A delivery truck rumbled past. But inside this pristine jewelry store with its gold-lettered windows and its established 1892 plaque and its whispered promise of elegance, time had frozen around 6 words that burned like acid. Gold doesn't suit darker skin tones. Adaeze looked at the man before her, this Harrison Whitmore IV, with his tailored suit and his grandfather's prejudices, and she felt the journalist in her cataloging every detail. The way his fingers hadn't quite released the bracelet when she'd reached for it, the practiced apologetic smile that didn't reach his eyes, the slight step backward, as if her very presence might contaminate his precious inventory. She'd known this was coming. Not consciously, maybe, but in that place deep in her bones where 50 years of microaggressions lived like scar tissue. She'd felt it the moment she walked through that door and saw Jennifer Hayes, the young white assistant, stiffen like Adaeze was carrying a weapon instead of a designer purse. She'd felt it when Harrison emerged from his office and did that quick up-down assessment, his eyes calculating her worth in fractions of seconds and finding her wanting. She'd felt it in the way he'd asked, voice dripping with false concern, "What brings you in today?" As if she'd wandered into the wrong neighborhood, the wrong tax bracket, the wrong universe entirely. But knowing it was coming didn't make it hurt less. "You're telling me," she said, her voice steady and cold as winter steel, "that gold doesn't suit my skin because I'm black." Harrison's face did something complicated. Surprise that she'd said it out loud. Defensiveness rising like bile. That peculiar white panic of being called out, even gently, even accurately. "I didn't say that exactly," he stammered, hands fluttering like nervous birds. "I just meant from a professional aesthetic standpoint, from years of experience in the industry. Certain metals complement certain complexions better than others. It's not about race, it's about harmony of tones, about what photographs well, about what will serve you best in the long run." "Stop." Adaeze held up one hand. Her nails were painted deep burgundy, perfectly manicured, and she watched Harrison's eyes flick to them and away, as if even her hands were somehow too much. "I've spent 25 years as an investigative journalist for the Chronicle, Mr. Whitmore. I've interviewed senators and CEOs and people who've committed actual crimes. I know when someone is lying to me. I know when someone is lying to themselves." She stepped back from the counter, reclaiming her space, her power, her right to exist. "You just told me, a black woman, that gold doesn't suit my skin. Let's not pretend that's about aesthetics. Let's call it what it is." "I'm trying to help you make a good choice," Harrison insisted, his voice rising slightly, color flooding his cheeks. "I'm trying to save you from buyer's remorse, from an investment that won't serve you well, from making a mistake that you'll regret when you see how it photographs against your skin tone. You're trying to save yourself from the discomfort of seeing me wear something beautiful." Adaeze's voice was quiet now, deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that made people lean in or back away. "You're trying to save yourself from the cognitive dissonance of a black woman in your store, demanding gold, refusing to be relegated to silver or bronze or whatever earthier metals you think suit my complexion." Jennifer, the assistant, had gone pale as paper. She stood frozen by the display case, clearly wishing she could disappear into the floor, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. A couple who'd been browsing near the diamonds had stopped pretending not to listen, and were openly staring now, their faces a mix of horror and fascination, like they were watching a car crash unfold in slow motion. Harrison's face had gone from white to red to an almost purple shade of distress. I think perhaps this isn't the right store for your needs. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the chain retailers downtown, where they have a wider variety of price points and styles that might be more suited to... Oh, I agree completely. Adaeze picked up her purse, a Bottega Veneta, that cost more than Harrison probably made in a month, and checked her reflection in the mirrored wall behind the counter. She looked magnificent. The morning light streaming through the front windows loved her skin, made it glow like polished mahogany dipped in honey. Her natural hair formed a crown of tight curls that framed her face perfectly. Her outfit, carefully chosen that morning for her blind date tonight with a man named Kang Min-jae, whispered elegance and power in every seam. Navy silk blouse that cost a fortune, tailored pants that fit like a dream, shoes that made her legs look like they went on forever. She looked like exactly what her name meant: daughter of the king, princess, royalty, and this small man in his small store with his small mind couldn't see it, wouldn't see it, had built his entire life and legacy around not seeing it. I've documented injustice for a living, she said, turning back to him, letting him see the full force of her presence, her power, her absolute refusal to be diminished. I know it when I'm standing in it. The only question is whether you know it too, or whether you're so comfortable in your prejudices that you've convinced yourself their expertise. She walked toward the door, every step deliberate, refusing to hurry, refusing to run, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a countdown. The door was 3 steps away. 2 steps. 1. The chime rang. A man entered, and the entire energy of the room shifted, like air pressure dropping before a storm. If you're feeling this tension right now, if this moment is hitting you where you live, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will restore your faith that justice is possible, and you won't want to miss a single word of what's coming. He was tall, 6'2" at least, moving with the kind of control that came from a lifetime of calculated violence that never needed to be deployed. His charcoal suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Cut so perfectly, it looked like it had been painted onto his frame by an artist who understood exactly how fabric should drape over muscle and bone. Salt and pepper hair styled with precision, not a strand out of place. A watch on his wrist that caught the light and threw it back in emerald flashes that said money, in a language everyone understood, the kind of timepiece that cost as much as a car. But it wasn't his appearance that changed the atmosphere. It was something else. Something in the way he paused just inside the door and let his eyes sweep the room with the assessment of a man who'd spent his life reading dangerous situations and knowing exactly when and how to respond. His gaze landed on Adaeze first, really looked at her, not the dismissive glance Harrison had given, but the full attention of someone actually seeing another human being. His eyes traveled from her face to her posture, to the tension in her shoulders, to the way her hand gripped her purse a little too tightly. Then, his eyes moved to Harrison, to Jennifer, to the couple by the diamonds who were trying very hard to become invisible, to the dropped bracelet on the counter that still gleamed on its bed of black velvet. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, not of people, but of a moment, of power dynamics playing out in real time, of injustice wearing the mask of professionalism, of a woman being made small by a man who thought he had the right. Adaeze felt her breath catch. She didn't know this man, had never seen him before in her life. But something in the way he held himself, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way his eyes went cold as he assessed the situation, told her he understood exactly what had just happened. "Mr. Kang," Harrison's voice jumped an octave, years of obsequiousness flooding back like muscle memory, his entire demeanor transforming in an instant from dismissive to deferential. "What a wonderful surprise! We weren't expecting you today. How can we help you? Is there something specific you're looking for? Perhaps a gift? An anniversary present? We just got in a stunning collection from Cartier that I think would be absolutely perfect for... There is no Mrs. Kang, the man said, his voice quiet and smooth as aged whiskey, with just a hint of accent that spoke of soul and childhood and a life lived between two worlds. And I'm not here to shop. Harrison's smile faltered, confusion and concern warring on his face. Oh? I want to know what's happening here. The man called Kang gestured toward Adaeze with one elegant hand, his movements economical and precise. This woman appears distressed. Oh, that's just a misunderstanding, Harrison said quickly. Too quickly, words tumbling over each other in his rush to minimize, to dismiss, to make the uncomfortable truth disappear like it had never existed. A small disagreement about product selection. Nothing significant. Certainly nothing that requires your attention, Mr. Kang. I assure you everything is perfectly fine. Just a matter of helping a customer understand which pieces would work best for her particular needs and aesthetic requirements. I'd like to hear from her. Kang's eyes were on Adaeze now, and she felt the weight of that attention like a physical thing, like sunlight breaking through clouds, like being seen for the first time in a long time. If she's willing to share. Adaeze had spent her entire life learning when to speak and when to stay silent, when to fight and when to preserve her energy for battles she could win. She was exhausted, bone-deep tired of these moments, of having to explain her humanity, of having to justify her right to exist in spaces that didn't want her. Every instinct screamed at her to just leave, to walk out that door and never look back, to wash her hands of this place and this man and this morning that had started with such hope and ended in such familiar humiliation. Her best friend Kioma had called her at 7 this morning, voice bright with excitement. Are you ready for tonight? Min-jae is so excited to meet you. I showed him your picture, and he said you were beautiful. This is going to be amazing, Ada. I can feel it. Adaeze had laughed, feeling light and hopeful for the first time in months. I'm going to buy him something nice. A bracelet, maybe. Something that says I'm taking this seriously. That's so sweet. He's going to love it. And you. He's going to love you. Now, standing in this store with her dignity under assault, that hope felt like it belonged to a different person. A different life. A different universe where black women could buy jewelry without being told their skin was wrong. But something in Kang's eyes steadied her. Not pity. Not that performative sympathy white people sometimes offered when they wanted to feel good about themselves, without actually doing anything. This was something else. Something that looked like genuine solidarity, like understanding born from his own experiences of being othered, even if those experiences were different from hers. He told me gold doesn't suit dark skin, she said simply, clearly, letting the words stand on their own without justification or explanation. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kang's expression didn't change dramatically. No theatrical outrage, no performative shock, but something in his eyes went absolutely glacial, like watching water freeze in real time. He turned to Harrison with the kind of attention that made the jeweler take an involuntary step backward, his body recognizing danger even if his mind hadn't caught up yet. Show me the bracelet she was looking at. Mr. Kang, I really don't think this is necessary. This is just a simple miscommunication, and I'm sure we can resolve it without taking up any more of your valuable time. Show me. Not a request. A command delivered in that same quiet voice that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. The voice of a man who was used to being obeyed and knew exactly what would happen if he wasn't. Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he retrieved the bracelet from the counter. Kang took it, turned it in the light, examined it with the eye of someone who knew craftsmanship when he saw it, who understood quality and artistry and the hours of labor that went into creating something beautiful. This is exceptional work, he said, his voice almost reverent as he studied the piece. 18th century technique, if I'm not mistaken. Italian goldsmith, probably Florentine based on the braiding pattern. The craftsmanship alone would take weeks, maybe months to complete by hand. Each link individually formed and then woven together with mathematical precision. He looked up at Harrison, his eyes sharp. "What's the issue with this piece?" "There's no issue with the piece itself," Harrison said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was simply offering professional guidance about aesthetic choices, about what tends to work well with different skin tones, about helping customers make informed decisions that they'll be happy with in the long term, about—" "So, when I wear gold," Kang interrupted, his voice cutting through Harrison's rambling like a knife, gesturing to his cufflinks that gleamed in the light, his watch that probably cost more than Harrison's car, a subtle chain just visible at his collar. "Does it suit me?" Harrison's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Panic, calculation, desperate backpedaling. "Of course, Mr. Kang, you have impeccable taste, absolutely impeccable, and the gold complements your complexion beautifully. It brings out the warmth in your skin tone. It speaks to your sophistication and understanding of quality. But not hers." Silence crashed down like a wave, drowning everything. The couple by the diamonds had given up all pretense of browsing and were now frozen in place, witnesses to something they'd probably talk about for years. Jennifer looked like she might actually faint, her face so pale that her freckles stood out like constellations. Harrison opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out, just a strangled sound that might have been an attempt at explanation, or justification, or something that would make this moment disappear. Kang set the bracelet down carefully, deliberately, his movements controlled in a way that suggested he was working very hard not to let them become uncontrolled. Each gesture measured and precise, like he was concentrating on not breaking something, or someone. He turned to Adaeze, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. Not desire, though there was attraction there, crackling in the air between them like static electricity, but something deeper, respect, recognition, the acknowledgement of someone seeing another person's dignity under assault and deciding to do something about it. "I'd like to buy you every piece of gold in this store," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the space. The words landed like a bomb. Adaeze felt her breath catch, her chest tightening with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Harrison made a strangled sound, his face going from red to white in an instant. Jennifer gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. The couple by the diamonds actually took a step backward, as if the shockwave from those words might physically knock them over. "Sir," Harrison managed, his voice barely above a whisper, shaking like leaves in a storm. "The entire collection is worth over $4 million. The vault alone contains pieces that have been in our family for generations, heirlooms that I didn't ask the price." Kang's eyes never left Adaeze's face, holding her gaze with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. No one should leave this store believing what he just said is true. No one should walk out of here thinking that their skin, their body, their existence is somehow incompatible with beauty. And here it was. The moment Adaeze had written about 100 times in her journalism career, had analyzed and dissected and critiqued in countless articles. The wealthy savior, the knight in expensive armor, the powerful man swooping in to rescue the damsel in distress from the dragon of racism. It was a story as old as time and just as problematic, because it positioned her as helpless, as needing rescue, as unable to save herself. It erased her agency even as it tried to honor her dignity. It made her pain about his heroism. She looked at this stranger who'd walked into her worst moment and tried to fix it with money and power. He was beautiful, she realized distantly. Not conventionally handsome in the way of movie stars or magazine covers, but compelling in the way of men who'd earned their presence through surviving things that should have broken them. Strong features that spoke of Korean ancestry, eyes that had seen violence and chosen not to become violent themselves. A mouth that looked like it smiled rarely, but meant it when it did. There was kindness in his eyes alongside the cold fury. Good intentions wrapped around wealth and privilege, and the absolute certainty that he could fix this, that money could solve what prejudice had broken. But good intentions didn't change the fundamental problem with rescue narratives. Good intentions didn't give her back her agency. Good intentions didn't address the systemic issue that would send another black woman into another store tomorrow to face the same humiliation. Adaeze met his gaze and said, clearly and firmly, her voice ringing out in the silence, "No." His eyebrows rose. Genuine surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by confusion, and then something that might have been respect. "That's incredibly kind," she continued, finding her voice, her power, her center in the midst of this chaos. "Probably the kindest gesture anyone's made for me in a long time. It's generous and thoughtful, and comes from a place of genuine outrage at injustice, and I appreciate that more than you probably know. But I don't need his gold." She gestured to the cases around them, at the fortune in precious metals that Harrison had tried to tell her she wasn't worthy of wearing, at the dynasty of prejudice crystallized in jewelry and displayed behind glass. "And I don't need to be rescued." She let that sink in, watched Kang's face as he processed her refusal, as surprise gave way to something that looked like understanding, maybe even admiration. His eyes widened slightly, his posture shifted, his whole demeanor changing from savior to witness. "But I appreciate that you stood up," she added softly, her voice gentler now, acknowledging the gift of his intervention even as she refused its form. "That matters! You showing up, bearing witness, calling it out, demanding accountability. That matters more than you probably know, because most people would have just walked past, would have pretended they didn't see, would have convinced themselves it wasn't their business. But you stopped, you saw me, you demanded that he see me too. That's worth something, that's worth everything." She turned to Harrison one last time. He looked smaller now, diminished by his own prejudices being held up to the light, like a creature from the deep sea suddenly exposed to sun. "You'll never understand what you did here today," she said, her voice steady and sure. "You'll probably go home tonight and tell yourself it was a misunderstanding, that you were trying to help, that the customer was unreasonable and difficult, and looking for problems where none existed. You'll make yourself the victim of your own cruelty, because that's easier than examining the beliefs you've inherited from your father, and grandfather and great-grandfather before him. That's what people like you do. You perform your prejudices and then act surprised when someone calls them by their name." She walked to the door, and this time no one stopped her. The chime rang as she stepped onto Madison Avenue, and the morning air hit her face like a baptism, like being born again, like emerging from underwater after holding her breath for too long. She made it 3 blocks before her hands started shaking, 5 blocks before tears threatened, burning behind her eyes like acid. 7 blocks before she had to stop and lean against a building, pressing her forehead to the cool stone, breathing in gasps that felt like drowning in reverse. Her phone buzzed. "Chioma." "How did it go?" Her best friend's voice was bright with anticipation, full of hope and excitement for what this day might bring. "Did you find something beautiful for tonight? Something that made you feel amazing?" Adaeze closed her eyes. 30 years of friendship meant Chioma could read her silences, could hear the things she wasn't saying in the spaces between words. "What happened?" Chioma's voice shifted immediately from excitement to concern. That lightning-fast adjustment that came from decades of loving someone, of bearing witness to their pain. The story poured out. Every word, every microaggression, every moment of that humiliation. Harrison's words that tried to make her skin wrong. Jennifer's complicit silence. The couple who'd watched like it was entertainment, like her pain was a spectacle for their consumption. And then the stranger, Kang. His offer that was as problematic as it was generous. Her refusal that felt like the only way to maintain her dignity. "You turned down $4 million in gold?" Kyoma's voice was equal parts shocked and proud, that particular mix of emotions that came from knowing someone well enough to understand why they'd make a choice that looked crazy from the outside. I turned down being rescued. That's my girl. A pause, heavy with understanding. But are you okay? No. Adaeze's voice cracked, the dam breaking, all the emotion she'd been holding back flooding through. I'm really not. I'm tired, so tired. Tired of these moments. Tired of having to be strong. Tired of walking into spaces and immediately calculating how much of myself I need to hide to be safe. Tired of being seen as a problem instead of a person. Just so tired. Of course you are. You've been fighting your whole life. Kyoma's voice gentled, wrapping around Adaeze like a blanket, like the comfort of being known. Come home. Rest. Shower. Wash him off you. But Adaeze? Yeah? Don't let him take tonight too. This blind date with Min-jae, he's a good man, different from anyone you've met. I wouldn't have set you up otherwise. You know that. I've known him for 5 years, seen how he treats people, seen how he uses his power. Don't let Harrison Whitmore steal your evening. Don't let him take any more from you than he already has. After they hung up, Adaeze did exactly that. She walked to the subway, rode it to Brooklyn, got off at Bedford-Stuyvesant where the streets felt more like home, where she could breathe a little easier. Kehin's atelier was tucked between a coffee shop that made the best plantain muffins in the city and a vintage clothing store run by a woman who understood that style had no size limit, the kind of place you'd miss if you didn't know to look for it. But inside, it was magic. Pure, crystallized magic. Gold and silver and precious stones worked into art by hands that understood beauty, came in every shade, every tone, every variation of human existence. Kehinda looked up as Adaeze entered, and her face immediately shifted from professional welcome to genuine concern, the kind of instant assessment that came from being a black woman who recognized pain in another black woman. What happened? I need you to make me something, Adaeze said, her voice still shaky but growing stronger with each word. Something that says I know exactly who I am. Something that doesn't apologize or explain or make itself smaller. Something that shines. They spent an hour designing it together, 2 black women bent over a sketch pad, creating beauty as an act of resistance. A bracelet, yes, but not like anything Harrison had in his vault of inherited prejudice. This would have Adinkra symbols worked into the gold, each one chosen deliberately, each one carrying meaning. Sankofa, the bird looking backward while moving forward, because you couldn't know where you were going without honoring where you'd been. Dwenimen, the ram's horn symbolizing strength and humility together, because real power never needed to prove itself. And in the center, formed from the braiding itself, woven so subtly that you'd only see it if you knew to look, the simple truth. I am worthy. This will take a few days, Kehinda said, already pulling out her tools, her hands moving with the confidence of decades of practice. Maybe a week if I want to get the symbols exactly right. I have a blind date tonight. Kehinda grinned, her whole face transforming with joy. Then you'll wear this. She pulled out a bracelet from her personal collection, from the pieces she kept for herself, because they meant something beyond their monetary value. Simple, elegant. Gold that caught the light and sang with it, that seemed to generate its own illumination. Bring it back when yours is ready, but tonight you wear gold. Tonight you shine. Adaeze took the train home to Harlem, to her brownstone in Strivers Row, where generations of black excellence had lived and dreamed and built worlds despite being told they didn't belong. She walked past the historic plaques, past the homes of artists and activists and people who'd refused to be diminished, drawing strength from their ghosts, from their legacy, from their absolute refusal to accept the world's assessment of their worth. She stood in her shower under water hot enough to scald, hot enough to turn her skin red, and scrubbed at herself like she could wash off the morning, like she could rinse away Harrison's words and the way they'd made her feel. She cried. Let herself feel it all. The rage and hurt and exhaustion, and that bone-deep weariness that came from being told, again and again and again, that she was less than. That her body was wrong, her skin was wrong, her very existence was somehow incompatible with beauty. But then she dried off, put on lotion that smelled like shea butter and home, like her grandmother's house when she was little, like Sunday mornings and love. Chose her dress, gold-toned and gorgeous, that made her skin look like it had been kissed by the sun, and liked what it found there. Put on the bracelet Kehinda had lent her, feeling its weight settle on her wrist like a promise. Did her makeup with care, each stroke of color, a small act of defiance, lined her lips, painted them deep wine, looked at herself in the mirror. You are daughter of the king, she told her reflection, speaking the words her mother had spoken to her, that her grandmother had spoken to her mother, that went back generations to ancestors who'd survived the Middle Passage and still found ways to shine. You are Adaeze Okafor, you are worthy, and you shine. At 6 o'clock, the car service texted that they were outside. Adaeze took one last look at herself, grabbed her purse, and stepped into the evening. The sun was setting over Harlem, painting the brownstones in shades of gold and amber, and she let that light touch her face, let it remind her that she belonged here, belonged everywhere, belonged in any space she chose to occupy. She would go on this blind date. She would meet this stranger named Kang Min-jae, whom Kayoma swore was different. She would reclaim her joy. She would not let Harrison Whitmore take any more of her life than he already had. What she didn't know was that 5 blocks away in Whitmore and Associates, that other stranger named Kang was still standing in the jewelry store, and his expression had gone from controlled to absolutely glacial. Min-jae watched the door close behind Adaeze and felt something shift in his chest. He'd met a lot of people in his life, had negotiated with billionaires and criminals, had sat across from people who'd killed and people who'd saved lives, had learned to read human nature in all its complicated variations. But he'd never met anyone who'd turned down $4 million in gold while standing in the ruins of their own humiliation. That took a kind of strength he rarely saw, a kind of integrity that couldn't be bought or faked or taught. He turned back to Harrison Whitmore, and whatever the jeweler saw in his face made him take another involuntary step backward. Tell me about your business, Mr. Whitmore, Min-jae said softly, his voice carrying that particular quiet that preceded storms. Harrison swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Behind him, Jennifer had backed into a corner, clearly wishing she could disappear through the wall, become invisible, cease to exist. The couple had left quickly, practically running for the door, not wanting to be witnesses to whatever was about to happen. It's been in my family for 5 generations, Harrison said, trying to regain some dignity, some sense of control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling away from him. We pride ourselves on quality, on expertise, on maintaining the standards that have made Whitmore and Associates a name synonymous with excellence for over a century. We've served presidents and celebrities. We've been featured in magazines. We have a reputation that... How's your rent situation? The question landed like a slap. Harrison's face went white, all the blood draining away in an instant. I don't see how that's relevant to... 3 months behind, aren't you? Min-jae pulled out his phone, scrolled through some information that he'd already gathered because he always gathered information, always knew more than people expected him to know. Your family's reputation doesn't pay the bills. Your expertise doesn't cover operating costs. You're hemorrhaging money, have been for years, and the landlord is getting impatient. Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. How do you... That's private information. That's confidential. Min-jae made a call. David answered on the first ring. That property on Madison we looked at last month. The one with the jewelry store? Make an offer. Today. Whatever it takes. I want it closed by end of business. Mr. Kang, please. I don't understand what you're doing. This is my family's legacy. You can't just... You humiliated a woman in your store today. Min-jae's voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath now. Iron wrapped in silk. The promise of consequences that couldn't be avoided. Told her gold doesn't suit her skin. Told her, in essence, that her blackness made her unworthy of beauty. That her body was wrong. That her very existence was incompatible with the precious metals you sell. I never said that. I would never use those words. I was just offering professional advice based on years of experience in the industry. You said exactly that. You just used prettier words to make yourself feel better about it. Min-jae looked around the store, seeing it with new eyes now. Seeing past the gleaming cases and the carefully curated displays to what it really was. A monument to exclusion, a temple of prejudice wrapped in the language of refinement. I'm going to buy your inventory. All of it. Every piece in every case. The entire vault. 4.2 million, you said? You can't be serious. This is insane. You can't just walk in here and destroy someone's life over one customer complaint. Over one misunderstanding. This isn't insane. This is consequences. Min-jae moved toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. And it's not over one complaint. It's over 100 years of your family treating people like her as less than. It's over generations of using politeness as a weapon, using professionalism as a shield for prejudice, convincing yourselves that your cruelty is expertise. He paused with his hand on the door. I have a friend. Samuel Park. Good man. Runs a shipping company in Red Hook. Hard work. Manual labor. Honest work. The kind that makes you sweat and hurt and understand that the world doesn't owe you anything just because your grandfather built something. He's always looking for people willing to learn. Min-jae met Harrison's eyes. You'll learn what you should have known already. How to treat people like human beings regardless of their skin color. How to see dignity in faces that don't look like yours. Or you won't. But at least you'll know that your prejudices have costs. I'll sue. I'll fight this. You can't just come in here and I can. And I will. Min-jae opened the door, the chimes sounding almost mocking in the heavy silence. My lawyers will contact yours by end of business. I suggest you take the deal. The alternative is bankruptcy, foreclosure, and having the Whitmore name become synonymous with racism instead of excellence. Your family's legacy destroyed not by me, but by you. By your grandfather's prejudices that you inherited without question. By your father's cruelty that you learned to call professionalism. By your own inability to see human beings as worthy of basic respect. He stepped onto Madison Avenue and stopped. Somewhere in this enormous city was the woman who'd turned down his offer. The woman who'd walked out with her dignity wrapped around her like armor. The woman who'd refused to be rescued, but had graciously acknowledged the gesture anyway. The woman who taught him something in the span of 5 minutes about strength and agency and the complicated ethics of intervention. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she lived or worked or what her life looked like beyond that moment of pain. But he knew one thing. He was going to find her. Because a woman who could refuse $4 million in gold while standing in the ruins of her own humiliation was a woman worth knowing, a woman worth fighting for, a woman worth changing for. And tonight, he had a blind date with someone named Adaeze, his friend Kioma's best friend, the one she'd been trying to set him up with for months. A journalist, she'd said, strong, brilliant, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with conventional standards. Been through some things, but came out stronger. 50 years old and finally ready to try dating again, after a divorce that had nearly broken her. He had a feeling the universe was about to prove it had a sense of humor. Had a feeling that the woman who'd refused his gold and the woman he was supposed to meet tonight might be the same person. Had a feeling his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. Min-jae went home to his penthouse in Tribeca, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, the one that felt too big and too empty most days. He stood in front of his closet, trying to decide what to wear for a blind date that suddenly felt more important than any business deal he'd ever made, more significant than any negotiation or acquisition or strategic move. He chose a suit. Not the most expensive one, not the Brioni or the Tom Ford, not the flashiest, but the one that made him feel like himself. Navy blue, subtle pinstripes, perfectly tailored. The suit that said he was serious, but not trying too hard, that he had money but didn't need to prove it, that he understood the difference between wealth and worth. He called his driver, picked up the gift he'd been planning to give this Adaeze woman, a small token that Kioma had said she'd appreciate. Something thoughtful, something that showed he'd listened when Kioma talked about her friend. A gold bracelet. He'd bought it at Whitmore and Associates 3 weeks ago. Before today. Before everything. Now it felt like prophecy. Like the universe had been setting this up all along, arranging the pieces on a board he couldn't see. Lennox Supper Club sat on 125th Street in the heart of Harlem, all jazz and intimacy, and that particular kind of elegance that came from black excellence refusing to apologize for existing, for taking up space, for creating beauty on its own terms. Min-jae had been here before, knew the owner Marcus who'd built this place from nothing, who'd created a space where people could breathe, where music lived in the walls, where the food was art and the service was family. Marcus greeted him warmly at the door. "Mr. Kang, wonderful to see you. Your table is ready, though your date hasn't arrived yet. Special occasion?" "Blind date," Marcus grinned. "Brave man or desperate?" "Maybe both." Min-jae sat at the corner table with a view of the door and waited. Ordered wine, a nice Bordeaux that cost more than it should but tasted like it was worth it. Watched the restaurant fill with couples and friends and the easy joy of people who didn't have to spend their days proving they deserved to take up space. He thought about the woman from this morning. Her face when Harrison said those words, the way pain and rage and exhaustion had flickered across her features before she'd locked it all down behind a mask of composure. The way she'd refused his help while acknowledging its value, the grace with which she'd walked away. He hoped she was okay, hoped she'd found some peace, hoped wherever she was, whatever she was doing, someone was treating her with the respect she deserved. Hoped the universe was being kinder to her than it had been this morning. The door opened. A woman entered, and Min-jae's heart stopped. Gold dress that made her skin glow, like she'd swallowed sunlight and was radiating it back into the world. Natural hair in a crown of tight curls that framed her face like she was royalty, like she was art, like she was everything Harrison Whitmore couldn't see. A bracelet on her wrist catching the light, simple and elegant and perfect, and a face he'd know anywhere because he'd been seeing it in his mind all day, memorizing every detail, every expression, every moment of her pain and power. Their eyes met across the restaurant. "You," she breathed, the word barely audible over the jazz piano playing in the corner. Min-jae stood slowly, like moving through water, like reality had become thick and strange, like the universe had just played the biggest joke of his life. "You." They stared at each other across the restaurant. The impossible coincidence, the cosmic joke, the universe deciding to throw them together not once but twice in the same day, first in tragedy and now in this moment of pure, unexpected possibility. What were the odds? What kind of fate or chaos or divine intervention arranged for two strangers shopping for each other in the same store at the same time to witness the same moment of cruelty and then to meet hours later as intended blind dates? She started laughing first. That kind of laughter that comes from shock and relief and the sheer absurdity of existence that bubbles up from somewhere deep and unstoppable. He joined her, both of them standing across the restaurant from each other, laughing like children, like people who'd been given an impossible gift and couldn't quite believe their luck, couldn't quite process what the universe was trying to tell them. Other diners turned to look, smiling at the sight of two people, so obviously caught in a moment of joy, not knowing the context, not understanding that this laughter was part relief and part disbelief and part the recognition that sometimes life wrote better stories than any writer could imagine. He walked to her table, weaving between other diners, his eyes never leaving her face. She was still laughing, tears in her eyes now, but these tears were different from the ones he'd imagined her crying this morning. These were joy and surprise, and something that might be hope, something that might be the beginning of something neither of them had expected. "May I sit?" he asked when he could speak, when the laughter had subsided enough for words. She nodded, unable to form words yet, her hand pressed to her chest like she was trying to keep her heart from jumping out, and they sat across from each other in a corner of Lennox Supper Club while around them the restaurant hummed with life and music and the particular magic of Harlem on a Friday night. Swing by the comments section right now and tell me, have you ever had a moment where the universe proved it had a sense of humor? Drop your story below, and don't forget to like this video if you're feeling this connection as much as I am. "I didn't catch your name this morning," he said finally when the silence between them had stretched from awkward to comfortable. "I didn't give it." She wiped her eyes, still smiling, still processing. "Adaeze Okafor." Adaeze. He tested the name on his tongue, let it roll around, tasted the syllables. It fit her perfectly. "What does it mean?" "Daughter of the king, princess." "Fitting." He met her eyes. "I'm Kang Min-jae." "I know." She shook her head, still marveling at the coincidence, at the sheer impossibility of this moment. "Kioma told me your name, just not what you looked like, or that you'd be at that store this morning, or that you'd offer to buy me $4 million in gold. That part she left out." "If she'd told you, would you have still come tonight?" "I almost didn't anyway." "What changed your mind?" "My friend reminded me that I don't hide." She lifted her wine glass in a small toast, and I decided I wasn't going to let him take my evening. I'd already given him my morning, that was enough. "I'm glad." Min-jae leaned back, studying her. She looked different now than she had this morning. Still tired, still carrying the weight of that violation. But there was something else too. Determination, defiance, the absolute refusal to be diminished. "You were magnificent today. The way you handled him. The way you refused my offer while acknowledging why I made it. I've never seen anything like it. You've never met a woman who turned down money?" "I've never met anyone who understood that rescue can be its own kind of violence." She looked at him sharply, surprise flickering across her face. "You understood that?" "Not at first, but I thought about it all afternoon. About why you said no, about what it meant that my first instinct was to throw money at the problem instead of asking you what you needed." He paused. "I'm still learning, but I'm trying to listen. That's more than most people do." They ordered food, and the conversation flowed like they'd known each other for years instead of hours. She told him about her work at the Chronicle, 25 years covering social justice, criminal justice reform, housing discrimination, the ways systems failed people who needed them most. She told him about the stories she'd broken, the lives she'd changed, the policies that had shifted because she'd refused to let injustice hide in shadows. He told her about his work, though he was careful about the details, aware that she was a journalist, and that some things couldn't be said out loud. Import, export, yes, but also other things. Problem solving for people who needed help, but couldn't get it through normal channels. Using money and power and connections to create consequences for people who thought they were untouchable. "The kind that requires people who can move through shadows," she said. "Sometimes." "And violence?" "I don't do the violence myself. I'm not built for it. Never had the stomach for hurting people directly." He met her eyes. "But I employ people who are, when necessary, when someone needs protection, or when consequences need to be delivered in ways the legal system can't or won't handle." She studied him for a long moment. He could see her journalist mind working, cataloging information, making connections, deciding how much she could accept and where her lines were. Does that bother you? He asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Ask me in a month, he laughed. Fair enough. The food came, and it was perfect. Marcus had outdone himself. Jerk chicken that fell off the bone, mac and cheese that tasted like somebody's grandmother had made it with love, collard greens cooked low and slow, cornbread that was sweet and savory at the same time, food that was art and culture and history all mixed together. They ate and talked about safer things for a while. Childhoods, his growing up in Seoul until he was 12, the son of a businessman who'd built an empire from nothing, who taught him that power was only useful if you used it right. Then moving to New York, learning to be Korean in America, navigating the model minority myth that tried to pit minorities against each other, that tried to use Asian success to shame black failure, that ignored the ways all of them were being manipulated by the same system. Hers growing up in Queens, daughter of Nigerian immigrants who'd come to America for a better life and found out that a better life came with costs they hadn't anticipated. Learning to be black in spaces that wanted her culture, but not her body, wanted her music and her style and her flavor, but not her presence, not her voice, not her power. You said something this morning, Min-jae said carefully, putting down his fork, giving her his full attention, about not needing to be rescued. I remember. I've been thinking about it all day, about why I made that offer, about what it said about me, about my assumptions, about the ways I've been trained to think that money solves everything. He paused, choosing words carefully. My father came to America with nothing. Literally nothing. $100 in his pocket and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. He built a business from scratch, taught me that power is only useful if you use it right, that if you have the ability to change things and don't, you're complicit in whatever continues. So you see injustice and respond, Adaeze said slowly. I try to. But you do it with money, with power. You use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. Sometimes the master's tools are all we have. She considered that, her head tilted slightly, her eyes thoughtful. Audre Lorde would disagree. Audre Lorde never met my father. He smiled slightly. Look, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not even saying my methods are good, or ethical, or the best approach. But this morning, I saw a woman being told she was less than, and I had the power to respond. So I did. Maybe it was ego, maybe it was performative allyship, maybe it was my own rage at racism finding a convenient outlet. I don't know, but I couldn't just walk past. I appreciate what you did, Adaeze said carefully. Truly, but it doesn't fix the system. Tomorrow, another black woman will walk into another store and be told she doesn't belong. Another black woman will be followed around like a criminal, while white shoppers are offered champagne. Another black woman will be told that her body is incompatible with beauty. What you did for me was beautiful and generous and came from a good place. But it's not justice, it's vengeance. Maybe justice and vengeance aren't so different. They're very different. Justice is systemic change. Vengeance is personal satisfaction. She leaned forward, her voice passionate now, her journalist's mind engaging with the ethics of what he'd done. Justice means changing the laws that let Harrisons exist. It means training employees to recognize their bias. It means creating consequences that are consistent and predictable, not dependent on whether a wealthy stranger happens to walk in at the right moment. What you did made us both feel better. But did it change anything for the next woman? Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. She was right, of course. He knew she was right, but he also knew that sometimes personal satisfaction was all you could get, that sometimes vengeance was the only justice available, that sometimes making one person pay was the only way to send a message that bad behavior had costs. Maybe not, he admitted. Maybe I just made myself feel powerful. Maybe I just wanted to impress you. Maybe I wanted to prove that not all men walk past when women are being hurt. All of that can be true, and it still matters that you stood up. But it's not enough. It's never enough. She reached across the table, touched his hand. The contact sent electricity through him. But it's something. It's a start. And sometimes that's all we can do. Start. And then keep going. They finished dinner slowly, neither wanting the evening to end despite the strangeness of how it had started. Dessert came, bread pudding with rum sauce that made them both close their eyes in appreciation. Coffee that was strong and dark and perfect. More wine. Around them, the restaurant began to empty as the evening grew late. Couples paying their bills and heading out into the Harlem night. But Min-jae and Adaeze stayed, lingering over the last of their wine, not wanting this bubble of connection to pop. "Walk me home?" Adaeze asked finally, when the restaurant was nearly empty and Marcus was giving them looks that were half amused and half impatient. "I'd like that very much." They paid the bill, Min-jae insisting despite Adaeze's protest that she could pay her own way, and stepped out into the Harlem night. The air was cool, but not cold. That perfect temperature that made you want to walk forever. They started east towards Strivers Row, and without discussing it, Min-jae offered his arm. Adaeze took it, and they walked like that, linked together, her hand in the crook of his elbow, their bodies finding a rhythm that felt natural. Felt right, felt like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Music spilled from open windows despite the hour. Someone was playing Coltrane, the notes floating down from a third-floor apartment. Someone else was cooking, the smell of fried fish mixing with car exhaust, and the particular sweetness of summer ending and fall beginning. People called to each other from stoops, conversations in Spanish and English, and Creole, and languages Min-jae didn't recognize, but understood anyway because human connection transcended words. "I've been thinking about this morning all day," Adaeze said as they walked past brownstones that had housed generations of Black excellence, past the homes of artists and activists and people who'd refused to accept the world's assessment of their worth. "The store? How small he tried to make me feel." She stopped walking, turned to face him under a street lamp on Lenox Avenue, the light catching her face and making her glow. "Did he succeed?" Min-jae looked at her, really looked at her, saw the vulnerability in that question, the way she was trusting him with something real and raw. "For a moment," he said honestly, "I think for a moment he made you doubt yourself. I saw it in your face. But then something shifted. You remembered who you were. You remembered your worth. And you walked out of there like a queen." "Daughter of the king," she said softly. "Exactly. I was so angry. I'm still angry. We'll probably be angry about it for weeks." She looked up at him. "Do you know what that's like? To be angry all the time? To walk through the world with this low-grade rage burning in your chest because you absolutely know that at any moment someone might try to make you small?" "Not the same way you do," Min-jae said carefully. "My anger is different. It comes from different places. But I think I understand some of it." "Tell me." So he did. Told her about being 12 and moving to New York and having other kids pull their eyes back in that mocking gesture. About being told he was good at math because he was Asian, as if his brain was somehow programmed differently because of his ethnicity. About the model minority myth that tried to use his success to shame other minorities, that tried to make him complicit in racism by holding him up as the exception. About being called a perpetual foreigner even though he'd lived in America for 33 years, even though he spoke English without an accent, even though this was his home in every way that mattered. "It's not the same," he said again. "I know it's not. I have privileges you don't. I can walk into a store and not be followed. I can get a cab. I can exist in white spaces without being seen as a threat. My racism is real, but it's different." "But it makes you listen," Adaeze said. "I try. I fail a lot, but I try." They started walking again, the conversation flowing between them like water, like something essential, like they were two people who'd been waiting their whole lives to find someone who understood. They talked about race and power and the ways America tried to pit minorities against each other so they wouldn't recognize their common enemy. They talked about solidarity and the difficulty of building coalitions across difference. They talked about love and loss and the courage it took to open your heart when the world kept trying to break it. By the time they reached Adaeze's brownstone in Strivers Row, Min-jae felt like he'd known her forever. Like they'd been having this conversation across lifetimes, across continents, across every barrier that separated human beings from truly seeing each other. At her door, she turned to him, suddenly uncertain. The confidence from earlier had given way to something softer, more vulnerable. "I'd invite you in," she started. "But it's been a day," he finished. "It's been a day." He reached up, touched her face gently, let his fingers trace the line of her jaw. "I'd like to see you again. Tomorrow. The day after. Every day if you'll let me." "That's fast. I'm 45. I don't have time to pretend I don't know what I want." She laughed, the sound bright and clear in the quiet street. "What do you want?" "You. If you'll have me, with all my complications and my morally ambiguous work and my fumbling attempts to understand racism that isn't directed at me. I want to know you. I want to learn from you. I want to be the kind of man who deserves to stand next to you. You already did that this morning. You stood next to me when you didn't have to. That was easy, standing next to you in the complicated parts, in the boring parts, in the parts where there's no grand gesture to make. And no clear villain to defeat? That's harder. That's what I'm asking for. Permission to try." Adaeze was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was memorizing it, like she was trying to see into his soul. "Ask me tomorrow," she said finally, "after I've slept and processed and figured out if this is real or if it's just adrenaline and cosmic coincidence." "Tomorrow," he agreed. He kissed her forehead, gentle and chaste, letting his lips linger for just a moment on her skin that was warm and soft and smelled like shea butter and something uniquely her. Then he stepped back, giving her space, giving her time, giving her the power to choose. "Good night, Adaeze Okafor." "Good night, Kang Min-jae." But tomorrow came sooner than either of them planned, arrived with the violence of news that couldn't wait, with the power of secrets that refused to stay buried. At 3 in the morning, Adaeze woke to her phone buzzing with news alerts, that particular pattern of notifications that meant something big was breaking, something that would dominate the news cycle, something that would change everything. She grabbed her phone, squinting at the screen, her heart already racing even before she knew why, and stopped breathing. Luxury jewelry store owner accused of racism after video goes viral. She sat up fast enough to make herself dizzy, her heart pounding, her hands shaking as she clicked the link. And there it was. Security footage from Whitmore and Associates. Black and white and grainy, but clear enough. Her standing at the counter. Harrison saying those words, his mouth forming shapes that couldn't be misunderstood even without sound. Her face as she processed the insult, as pain and rage flickered across her features. Min-jae, entering like an avenging angel. The confrontation. Her refusal of his offer. Her walking out with her head high. The video had 17 million views. 17 million people had watched her worst moment. Had witnessed her humiliation. Had seen her pain displayed for public consumption. She felt exposed. Violated. Like someone had stripped her naked and put her on display in the middle of Times Square. This morning was supposed to be hers to process privately, to deal with on her own terms, to integrate into her story in whatever way she chose. Now it belonged to everyone. By 6 a.m., the video had 30 million views. By 8, it was on every major news site, trending on every social media platform, being discussed on morning shows and talk radio and podcast episodes that were being recorded in real time to capitalize on the moment. Luxury store owners' racist comments caught on tape. Black woman refuses $4 million in gold after being told it doesn't suit her skin. Viral video exposes ongoing racism in high-end retail. Who is the mysterious benefactor who tried to buy out the store? Her phone started ringing. Reporters. Her editor at the Chronicle who wanted an exclusive, first-person piece. TV producers wanting her to come on their shows and tell her story. Publishers wondering if she'd consider writing a book. Everyone wanted a piece of her pain, wanted to monetize her humiliation, wanted to turn her worst moment into content. Harrison had released a statement. She read it with a kind of detached horror, watching him perform contrition without actually apologizing, watching him claim misunderstanding while refusing to acknowledge the harm. I deeply regret any distress caused to the customer in question. The comments made were taken out of context and do not reflect the values that Whitmore and Associates has maintained for over a century. We pride ourselves on serving all customers with respect and dignity, and we are committed to diversity and inclusion in all aspects of our business. We will be implementing additional training for all staff members to ensure that every customer feels valued and welcomed in our store. Nothing about what he'd actually said. Nothing about examining his own prejudices. Nothing that suggested he understood what he'd done wrong. Just corporate speak and deflection, and the performance of learning without the actual work of change. By afternoon, Adaeze felt like she was drowning. The notifications wouldn't stop. The emails kept coming. Her phone rang constantly with numbers she didn't recognize, with area codes from across the country, with international calls from media outlets that somehow had her personal number. And through it all, she felt weirdly numb. Exposed, but numb. Like she was watching this happen to someone else. Like her pain had been commodified and packaged and sold so many times that it no longer belonged to her. At 6 p.m., her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Min-jae standing there with coffee and croissants, and an apology in his eyes that was so genuine it made her chest ache. "I didn't release the footage," he said immediately, before she could say anything, before she could decide whether she was angry at him or grateful, or some complicated mix of both. Building security must have sold it to the press. Or Harrison released it thinking it would make him look better. I don't know, but it wasn't me. I wouldn't do that without asking you first. I know. She let him in, suddenly glad not to be alone with this. Glad to have someone who understood, who'd been there, who'd witnessed it all. I've been getting calls all day. I'm sorry. Don't be. She showed him her laptop, the article she was working on for the Chronicle, the one her editor had called about this morning when the video first went viral. This is what I do. I tell stories that need telling. Might as well be my own story this time. He read over her shoulder, and she felt his presence like warmth against her back, like an anchor in a storm. She'd written it raw and honest, no holding back, no protecting anyone's feelings. The morning at Whitmore's described in excruciating detail. The feeling of being diminished, of being told her body was wrong, of being made small by a man who thought his expertise mattered more than her humanity. Min-jae's intervention described with complexity, acknowledging both the power of his gesture and the problems with rescue narratives. Her refusal and why it mattered, why agency mattered more than gold, why she needed to save herself. And at the end, a call to action. Support Black-owned businesses. Examine your own prejudices. Speak up when you see injustice, but also listen to the people most affected about what kind of support they actually need. Don't wait for someone with money and power to do the work that all of us should be doing every day. You're going to write about me, he said when he finished reading. Is that a problem? No. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on the top of her head. She fit against him perfectly, like they'd been designed to occupy the same space. Write it. Tell the truth. All of it. The complicated parts and the uncomfortable parts, and the parts that make me look good, and the parts that don't. Even the part where I call your rescue attempt problematic allyship? Especially that part. So she finished the article, added quotes from scholars about microaggressions in retail spaces, added statistics about how often Black women face this kind of discrimination, added interviews with other Black women who'd experienced the same thing, who'd been followed in stores, who'd been told they couldn't afford things they could easily buy, who'd been made to feel like their very presence was suspicious. And she wrote about the aftermath, about Min-jae buying the building and the inventory, about Harrison being offered a job at Samuel Park's shipping company, about the auction being planned for all that jewelry, with proceeds going to Black women's organizations, education grants, business loans, leadership programs, mentorship initiatives. She ended with this: "Gold suits me. It always did. Not because someone said so, but because I say so. That's the only permission I need. That's the only permission any of us need. To exist. To shine. To be worthy of beauty, not despite our skin, but because of it. With it. Through it. I am daughter of the king. I am Adaeze, and I shine." The article was published the next morning. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. Within 3 hours, 5 million. By the end of the day, it was everywhere. Shared across every platform. Discussed on every news show. The video clip of Harrison's statement being played side by side with Adaeze's article, the emptiness of his corporate speak, highlighted by the power of her truth-telling. Women started writing to her. Not just hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. Black women sharing their own stories of being told they didn't belong, of being followed in stores, of being dismissed by salespeople, of being treated like criminals or curiosities, or anything other than customers with money to spend and dignity to protect. Adaeze read every single message, stayed up until 3 in the morning, reading stories that broke her heart and filled her with rage and reminded her why this work mattered. Each story was the same and different. Same pattern, different details, same wound, different scar. And somewhere in the middle of reading the 500th message from a woman who'd been told gold didn't suit her, Adaeze realized something. One article couldn't contain this. One piece of writing, no matter how powerful, couldn't hold the weight of all these stories, all this pain, all this accumulated rage and exhaustion and determination. She needed to do something bigger, something lasting, something that transformed pain into power, humiliation into healing, cruelty into community. She called Min-jae at 2 in the morning. He answered on the second ring, voice alert like he'd been waiting for her call. "I have an idea," she said without preamble. "About the building. About what we should do with it." "Tell me." 3 months later, Adaeze stood in what used to be Whitmore and Associates and barely recognized it. The transformation was complete, total, revolutionary. Where jewelry cases had once stood, there were now bookshelves. Where diamonds had been displayed, there was now art. Where cruelty had been performed in the name of professionalism, there was now community. The walls had been painted warm gold, not the cold yellow of cheap paint, but deep, rich gold that seemed to generate its own light. Windows that had been covered for decades to protect precious merchandise had been opened, cleaned, made transparent so that light flooded in from morning until night. The old marble floors had been replaced with warm wood. The intimidating displays had given way to comfortable seating, to meeting tables, to spaces designed for gathering and creating and healing. The Radiance Community Center, the sign outside read, "Where everyone shines." Inside, it was everything Adaeze had dreamed. A gallery space on the main floor where Black artists could display their work and actually sell it, where young girls could walk in and see themselves reflected in the art on the walls. Meeting rooms upstairs for organizers and activists, and people building movements that would change the world. A cafe in the back, supplied by Black-owned coffee roasters and bakers, where people could gather and talk and plan, and simply exist without having to prove they deserved to. A library on the second floor with thousands of books by Black authors, Black poets, Black thinkers, from every discipline and genre. A mentorship program space in the basement where young Black women could meet with older Black women who'd survived and thrived and refused to be broken. A small theater for performances and readings and conversations. Computer stations for job searches and resume building and all the practical work of surviving in a system designed to break you. "What do you think?" Min-jae asked beside her, his voice soft with something that might have been pride or love or both. "I think it's perfect." She turned to him, this man who'd walked into her life at her lowest moment and somehow made it the highest. "You did this." "We did this?" He pulled out blueprints, pointed to different areas. "Look, the gallery space was your idea. The library was your idea. The mentorship program was your idea. I just wrote the checks. You built this." "We built this," she corrected. "Together." And they had. Over the past 3 months, they'd become partners in every sense of the word. Working together to transform the space. Meeting with architects and contractors and artists. Reaching out to organizations that would use the center. Planning programs and initiatives. Arguing about details and compromising and learning each other's languages. And somewhere in the process of building this space, they'd built something else too. A relationship, a partnership, love that grew slowly, carefully, between two people who'd found each other in the worst moment and decided to create something better. They'd moved in together 6 weeks ago, Adaeze's brownstone becoming their shared space. Her books everywhere, his quiet presence, morning coffee together, evening walks, conversations that stretched late into the night about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and needs and the small intimacies that made a life together. They fought sometimes about his work, which she still didn't fully understand or approve of, about her level of exposure in the media, which made him worry for her safety, about cultural differences that emerged when they were tired or stressed, moments when Korean and Nigerian and American all collided and created friction. But they always came back to each other, always chose to work through it, always recognized that what they had was rare and precious and worth fighting for. Her article had gone viral beyond anything she'd imagined. Millions of views, thousands of shares. It had been republished in outlets around the world, had been translated into a dozen languages, had sparked conversations in living rooms and boardrooms and classrooms about retail racism and microaggressions and what allyship actually looked like. And from it came a book deal. The Gold We Carry, essays on racism, dignity, and the refusal to be diminished. She was still writing it, still collecting stories, still trying to find words adequate to the weight of what needed to be said. But it was coming together, taking shape, becoming real. And now this, the center, the physical manifestation of transformation. The proof that pain could become purpose, that humiliation could fuel creation, that one morning's cruelty could birth a space of healing. 3 weeks before the center was scheduled to open to the public, they held the auction. The jewelry from Whitmore's vault displayed one last time, but with new context, new meaning, new power. The event was held at the Metropolitan Ballroom in Midtown, that grand space with chandeliers and marble and the kind of old-world elegance that used to make Adaeze feel unwelcome, but now felt like territory she'd conquered. Black women filled the space, dressed in their finest, gold everywhere as a statement, as rebellion, as art. Young women and old women. Rich women and women who'd saved for months to afford their tickets. Women who'd survived and women who were still surviving. All of them gathered to witness transformation, to participate in justice, to be part of something bigger than themselves. Each piece from the vault was displayed with new meaning. Not just jewelry anymore, but symbols of reclamation. Each bracelet, each necklace, each ring was labeled not with its original price, but with what it had become. Reclaimed, said one tag. Worthy, said another. Radiant, magnificent. unstoppable, brilliant, enough. Words that Harrison Whitmore would never have associated with the black women. Words that now defined how these women saw themselves. The bidding was fierce, competitive in the best way, joyful even. Women bid not just to own beautiful things, but to participate in this act of transformation, to say with their money and their presence that they refused to be told they didn't deserve beauty. By the end of the night, they'd raised $6.8 million. Almost $2 million more than Min-jae had paid for the inventory, because turns out when you let black women reclaim their power, they show up with resources and determination, and the absolute refusal to be outbid. All of it went to organizations supporting black women. Education grants for girls who wanted to go to college, business loans for women entrepreneurs who couldn't get traditional financing, leadership development programs, mental health resources, legal aid, bail funds. All the practical work of survival and thriving in a system designed to break you. Adaeze stood at the podium to speak, looking out at hundreds of faces that looked like hers, at women who'd survived their own Harrisons, at a room full of refusal and resilience, and the absolute determination to shine. This gold was used to exclude, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. Tonight, it includes, every piece sold here funds a black woman's education, her business, her dream. We are reclaiming not just jewelry, but our right to shine, our right to exist in spaces that don't want us, our right to be seen as we are, worthy, beautiful, deserving of every good thing this world has to offer. The room erupted. Women stood and cheered and cried and hugged each other. Perfect strangers, finding solidarity in shared experience, shared pain, shared joy. Some women were weeping openly, others were laughing. All of them were celebrating this moment of collective power, this proof that transformation was possible. From the audience, Min-jae caught her eye. He was sitting near the back, deliberately out of the spotlight, letting this moment belong to the women who needed it. But their eyes met across the room, and she saw pride in his face, love in his expression, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. And then he raised his auction paddle. The room fell silent. The final piece was being presented. The original bracelet, the one Harrison had told her didn't suit her, the one that had started everything. It sat on black velvet under spotlights gleaming like captured sunlight. "Starting bid," the auctioneer said, $50,000. Paddles went up immediately. Women who wanted to own this particular symbol, who wanted this piece of history. 60,000, 70, 80. Min-jae's paddle stayed up through all of it. 90, 100. Other bidders started dropping out, recognizing that someone was determined to win this particular piece, letting him have it. 200,000, Min-jae said clearly. The room gasped, applauded, understood what was happening. 250. $300,000, Min-jae said, and his voice carried the weight of promise, of completion, of a circle being closed. The auctioneer looked around the room. No other bidders. No one willing to outbid this man who clearly had his reasons. "Sold," the auctioneer declared. $300,000 to Mr. Kang. The applause was thunderous. Women stood, cheered, recognized the poetry of this moment. The man who'd tried to buy her gold months ago finally succeeding, but in a way that honored her agency, that contributed to her cause, that completed the story in the only way that made sense. Later, after the crowds had cleared and the checks had been written, and the jewelry had been carefully packed for transfer to its new owners, after the ballroom had emptied and the night had wound down to just the two of them standing in a space that echoed with the ghosts of joy, Min-jae presented the bracelet to her. "This was always meant to be yours," he said, opening the box, revealing the gold that had started everything. "You're ridiculous," she said, but her eyes were filling with tears. $300,000 for a bracelet I refused months ago. Not ridiculous, in love. He took the bracelet out, held it up to catch the light. "I'm in love with you, Adaeze Okafor. Have been since the moment you walked out of that store with your head high. Since the moment you refused my help while acknowledging its value. Since the moment you taught me that rescue can be its own kind of violence and that real love means supporting, not saving. It was the first time he'd said it out loud, though it had been obvious for months in the way he looked at her, the way he showed up, the way he'd woven himself into her life with such gentleness and certainty. I love you, too, she said, and watched his face transform with joy, with relief, with the particular vulnerability of someone who'd risked their heart and found it safely held. Have loved you probably since that first night, since you walked me home and listened without trying to fix, since you let me be angry and complicated and didn't need me to be grateful. I know. You told me 3 weeks ago, after we finished painting the library. You said I could love you if you let me. And I've been waiting for you to realize you already do. She laughed and cried, and let him slip the bracelet onto her wrist, where it settled like it had always belonged there, like it had been waiting all this time to find its home. They kissed there in the empty ballroom with $6.8 million worth of justice surrounding them like a blessing. Like proof that sometimes the universe arranged things perfectly, that sometimes pain transformed into purpose, that sometimes love arrived exactly when you stopped looking for it and started building yourself instead. 2 months later, the Radiance Community Center opened its doors. Grand opening on a Saturday morning in April when the weather was perfect and the city felt alive with possibility. The transformation was complete. Where Harrison Whitmore had once told a woman she didn't belong, hundreds of women now gathered. Where cruelty had been performed, healing now happened. Where exclusion had been policy, inclusion was practice. Young black girls toured the space with eyes wide as saucers, pointing at the art on the walls, touching the books with reverent fingers, asking if they could really come here whenever they wanted, asking if this place was really for them. Yes, Adaeze told every single one of them. This place is for you. You belong here, you are worthy, you shine. Elderly black women cried, saying over and over, "We needed this. Lord, we needed this. We've been waiting our whole lives for a space like this." Women who'd survived Jim Crow and integration and the long, slow violence of American racism finding sanctuary in a space that had been built from the ruins of that same racism. Artists displayed their work in the gallery and actually sold it, making money from their passion, building careers from their creativity. Entrepreneurs met with mentors and drew up business plans that would become actual businesses. Activists planned campaigns that would change policies and laws and lives. Young women sat in the library reading books that reflected their experiences back to them, seeing themselves in words and stories and possibilities. And in the corner, barely visible through the front window, Harrison Whitmore stood outside looking in. Adaeze saw him first. She was giving a tour to some donors, explaining the vision, the mission, the impact they'd already had in just the first week of being open. And there he was, older, somehow, though it had only been 6 months. Tired. His expensive suit, rumpled. His face drawn. No longer the confident jeweler who told her gold didn't suit her, but a man who'd lost everything. And maybe was starting to understand why. She excused herself from the group and walked to the window, looked out at him through the glass. He met her eyes and something passed between them. Not forgiveness. She wasn't sure she could ever fully forgive the hurt of that morning, the casual cruelty wrapped in professional concern, the violence disguised as expertise, but maybe something close to understanding. He'd been taught to see the world a certain way, had inherited his prejudices like he'd inherited his business, never questioning, never examining, never wondering if maybe he was wrong. Did he understand now? Had working for Samuel Park taught him anything? Had losing his business, his reputation, his comfortable life made any difference at all? Had he learned to see black women as human beings worthy of respect and beauty and dignity? She didn't know, would probably never know, and realized with some surprise that it didn't matter anymore. His learning, his growth, his journey wasn't her responsibility. She'd done what she needed to do, survived, spoken truth, built something beautiful from the ashes of that morning. Whether he changed or didn't change, whether he learned or stayed locked in his prejudices, that was his work to do, not hers to carry. Min-jae appeared beside her, his presence grounding her. "Should I? No, let him go." They watched Harrison turn and walk away, disappearing into the flow of Madison Avenue traffic, just another man in an expensive suit carrying the weight of his own choices. Maybe he'd change. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd spend the rest of his life convinced he was the victim of political correctness and cancel culture. Maybe he'd have a moment of genuine insight and transformation. Either way, it wasn't her responsibility to wait around and find out. Do you think changed? Min-jae asked. "I don't know, but it doesn't matter." She turned to him. "We changed. The center exists. Those organizations got funded. Young girls are seeing themselves represented in art and books and possibility. Women have a space to breathe and plan and heal. That matters more than whether Harrison Whitmore learned his lesson. Still, part of me wants to know if the consequences actually produce change. That's ego, the part that wants our actions to have clear results, neat endings, proof that we made a difference in quantifiable ways." She touched his face gently, letting her palm rest against his cheek. "But real change is messy. It's ongoing. It happens in ways we'll never see or know about. Someone who was in that store that day might have gone home and examined their own biases. Jennifer might quit and refuse to be complicit in racism anymore. The couple who witnessed it might speak up the next time they see injustice. We don't get to know. We just did what we could, and that has to be enough." That evening, after the opening day, crowds had finally cleared, and the last well-wishers had left, and the staff had gone home exhausted and triumphant. Adaeze and Min-jae stood alone on the skyline rooftop garden at the top of the Radiance Center. They'd built this space last, carved it out of what used to be storage, turned it into a sanctuary. A garden in the sky with planters full of herbs and flowers, with benches for sitting and thinking, with a view of Harlem stretching out below them like a promise. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and orange, and that particular purple that only happened in spring. The city was alive below them. Car horns and sirens and music and laughter and all the sounds of millions of people living their complicated lives. She was wearing the bracelet. The original one. The one that had started everything. It caught the dying light and threw it back in flashes that looked like small suns, like captured starlight, like proof that beauty existed not despite racism, but in defiance of it. "I still think about that morning sometimes," she said quietly, leaning into Min-jae's warmth as he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "The store. How small he tried to make me feel." She touched the bracelet absently, feeling its weight, its meaning, everything it had become. How close I came to believing him. "Does this help?" He gestured to the center below them, alive with light and purpose, and the sound of women's voices rising in conversation and laughter. Yes, and no. She turned to face him fully. "It helps knowing something good came from something painful. That other women have a space now. That we turned his cruelty into healing, his exclusion into inclusion. That we built something lasting. But it doesn't erase the memory, doesn't guarantee it won't happen again tomorrow. Doesn't mean I won't walk into another store or restaurant or doctor's office or bank and face the same thing. The center is beautiful. The work we're doing is important. But the system that created Harrison Whitmore is still intact. It happened today, actually." She showed him her phone, a message from a woman she'd never met. Another store, another black woman told she didn't belong, another clerk who thought they were being helpful while really they were performing violence. Same story, different location, endless variations on the same theme. Min-jae read the message, his jaw tightening with familiar anger. What did you tell her? That I know, that I believe her, that she's not alone, that there's a space here for her if she needs it. Adaeze put her phone away. What else can I say? I can't fix it for her. Can't buy her a building or start a revolution from scratch. Can only offer solidarity. You did more than that. You created this. He gestured to the center, to everything they'd built. A model that can be replicated, a blueprint for transformation. Other cities are already asking how they can do something similar. Maybe, but models and blueprints don't stop the next Harrison from saying those same words to the next woman. She wasn't being pessimistic, just realistic, just honest about the scale of the problem they were trying to address. This fight doesn't end. It just changes shape. New tactics, same war. Then we keep fighting. We do. She smiled, small and sad and real. But some days I'm tired. Some days I want to rest. Some days I want to just be a woman who buys a bracelet without it becoming a national news story, without having to turn my pain into purpose, without having to be strong and resilient and an example. I know. Do you? Really? She wasn't angry, just curious, just needing to know if he truly understood. You experienced racism differently. Model minority myth, perpetual foreigner, being asked where you're really from even though you've lived here for 33 years. Those are real and painful, and I'm not dismissing them. But you don't walk through the world in black skin. You don't carry that particular target. You don't have the history of slavery and Jim Crow and police violence and medical experimentation and housing discrimination and all the accumulated weight of American anti-blackness. No, he agreed quietly, honestly. I don't. And I'm still learning what that means. Still learning to listen more than I speak, to support without centering myself, to use my privilege without expecting gratitude or recognition. He touched her face with infinite gentleness. You make me better, teach me things I should have known, call me out when I mess up, push me to examine my own biases. That's a gift, even though I know it's exhausting for you to have to do that labor. It is exhausting, she admitted. Sometimes I don't want to be your teacher. Sometimes I want to just be your lover, your partner, your person. Sometimes I want you to do the work of educating yourself instead of expecting me to do it for you. I know, and I'm working on that. Reading books, following organizers, listening to podcasts, joining spaces where I can learn from other people, so the burden doesn't always fall on you. He pulled her closer. I love you, and part of loving you is doing the work to be worthy of you. Not because you ask me to, because it's right. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching their city light up one building at a time as darkness fell, watching the center below them glow like a beacon, like a lighthouse guiding people home. Do you remember what you said when I offered to buy you gold? Min-jae asked finally. I said I didn't need to be rescued. You saved yourself, I just bore witness. He touched the bracelet on her wrist, the one he'd bought for $300,000 at an auction that had raised almost $7 million. You saved yourself every single day. Before me. During. After. This is all you. It's all us, she corrected. You bought the building, funded the renovations, used your connections to make things happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Don't diminish that. As long as you don't diminish your part, your voice, your courage, your refusal to be made small, your vision for what this could become. She kissed him, soft and slow, tasting possibility and partnership and that particular sweetness of being truly known, truly seen, truly valued for exactly who you were, without having to edit or perform or hide the complicated parts. Does it suit me? She asked against his lips, lifting her wrist so the bracelet caught the city lights, so the gold glowed in the gathering darkness. It always did. 1 year after that morning at Whitmore and Associates, the the Radiance Community Center threw an anniversary celebration. The statistics were staggering. 500 women served directly through programs and services. 50 artists given gallery shows, most of whom had sold work and were now supporting themselves through their art. 20 businesses launched with seed funding from the auction proceeds. Black-owned businesses that were now employing other people, creating wealth, building generational change. 100 mentorship pairs, women teaching women, passing down knowledge and wisdom and the practical skills of survival. 30 activist organizations using the meeting space regularly, planning campaigns that would change laws and policies and lives. 5,000 books in the library, all by Black authors, all available for free. A cafe that had become a neighborhood hub, serving good food and better conversation, employing local young people and teaching them food service skills. Adaeze's book, The Gold We Carry, had been on the bestseller list for 3 months straight. She'd been on every major talk show, given keynotes at universities across the country, testified before Congress about the need for systemic change and how Black women were treated in commercial spaces. She'd become a voice for a movement she never meant to start, but couldn't walk away from, a symbol of something larger than herself. And through it all, Min-jae was there. Not in the spotlight, that wasn't his style, but beside her, behind her, beneath her, supporting, challenging, loving her in that quiet, steady way that made her feel safe enough to be fully herself, complicated and angry and tired and joyful all at once. They'd been living together for almost a year now, had learned each other's rhythms and needs and the small intimacies that made a life together. Coffee in the morning, how he took his, the way she liked to read in bed before sleeping, his tendency to work too late, her need for Sunday mornings to be slow and quiet. They fought sometimes, real fights about real things, about his work that still existed in moral gray areas she wasn't always comfortable with, about her level of exposure that made him worry, about cultural differences that emerged when stress brought out old patterns. But they always came back to each other, always chose to work through it, always recognized that what they had was rare and precious and worth fighting for. At the anniversary celebration, standing in the center surrounded by evidence of what they'd built, Adaeze felt something shift in her chest. Not healing, exactly. The wound from that morning still ached sometimes, still caught her by surprise when she least expected it, still flared up when she walked into certain spaces, or heard certain comments, or saw the way some people looked at her. But something else. Transformation. The knowledge that pain could become purpose, that humiliation could fuel creation, that one morning's cruelty could birth a year's worth of grace. A young woman approached her hesitantly, early 20s maybe, with nervous eyes and a story she clearly needed to tell, that weight of experience that needed witness. "Excuse me, Ms. Okafor." Adaeze turned, saw herself 10 years ago in this woman's face, that particular mixture of hope and exhaustion that came from trying to exist in a world that constantly questioned your right to do so. "Yes? I just wanted to say thank you, for this place, for your book, for speaking truth." The woman's voice shook. "I was followed around a store last week. Security guard trailed me the entire time while white shoppers browsed freely. The manager said I looked like someone who'd been shoplifting even though I've never stolen anything in my life. I was just trying to buy my mom a birthday present." Adaeze's heart cracked open with recognition. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." "Did it get better?" the woman asked, her eyes searching Adaeze's face for answers, for hope, for some promise that the fight was worth fighting. "After everything? After the center and the book and all the work you've done? Did it change things?" And here was the question Adaeze had been asked 100 times in 100 different ways since her article went viral. Did the work matter? Did the center change anything? Did her book, her speeches, her testimony before Congress actually move the needle? Or were they just performance, Catharsis disguised as activism, making her feel better while changing nothing fundamental about the systems that created Harrison's? She looked at this young woman who'd been humiliated for trying to celebrate her mother, looked around at the center, at the women finding community and power and voice, looked at Min-jae across the room, watching her with those steady eyes that saw all of her and loved what they saw, looked at her own wrist where the bracelet gleamed, $300,000 worth of reclaimed dignity. Sometimes, she said finally, honestly, refusing to lie or sugarcoat or offer false hope. It got better sometimes. Not always, not everywhere, not for everyone. But we built this. She gestured to the center around them. And spaces like this are being built in other cities now, inspired by our model. Women like you come here and find people who believe them, who see them, who know their stories are true and important. That's real change, even if it's not systemic change. That's transformation, even if it's not revolution. But the system is still broken. Yes, the system is still broken. Tomorrow, another black woman will walk into another store and be treated like a criminal. Another black woman will be told her skin is wrong, her hair is wrong, her body is wrong. The fight continues. Adaeze touched the young woman's arm gently. That's not nothing, but it's also not everything. Both things are true. We made something beautiful from something ugly, and the ugliness still exists. How do you keep fighting? The woman asked desperately. How do you not give up? We find each other. We build spaces like this. We tell our stories. We refuse to be silent or small or ashamed. Adaeze showed her the bracelet. And we wear the gold anyway. We claim our beauty anyway. We shine anyway. Not because the system said we could, but because we said we could. The woman touched the bracelet reverently, her fingers tracing the gold that had started everything. It suits you. It always did. As the party wound down and people began to leave, Min-jae found Adaeze standing at the front window, watching the sun set over Madison Avenue, watching the light paint the buildings gold. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth, into his solidity, into the particular comfort of being known. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice soft against her ear. "That Harrison Whitmore was wrong. Gold suits me perfectly." "It does. Not because of my skin or despite my skin. Because I decided it does. Because I claimed that right. Because I refused to let him define my worth." She turned in his arms to face him. "I wear this every day now. The bracelet you bought. For $300,000 at an auction that never would have happened if you hadn't stood up that morning. You wear it as a reminder." "Of what?" "That your worth was never his to determine. That love found you in the midst of hate. That one space of dignity multiplied into hundreds. That pain can become purpose if we let it. That the fight continues, but we're not fighting alone." "Yes," she breathed, "all of that." They kissed as the sun set, as the city transformed from day to night, as the Radiance Community Center glowed below them like a promise kept, like a dream made real, like proof that sometimes, justice was possible. Before we end, before you close this video and go back to your regular scrolling, I need you to do something. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or remember your own worth or recognize your own complicity or understand something you didn't before, take action. Leave a comment below telling me your story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling stories that matter. Stories about dignity and resistance and the refusal to be broken. And most importantly, do something. Support a Black-owned business. Examine your own biases. Speak up when you see injustice. Don't wait for someone with money and power to do the work that all of us should be doing every day. And remember this: you are worthy. You are seen. You shine. Not because someone gave you permission, but because you exist. And that has always been enough.